Welcome, welcome, welcome. Be another Discourse Friday. It's a bit of a loud one, but this one's gonna be on location instead of just like chilling in my house, which is nice. So this one is at the thing of Selena. And the beautiful thing about that is the concept of America. Because it's a nation of immigrants. Continue with the topic of immigration. Let's talk about what's it like to be the son of immigrants or a daughter of immigrants. What's astounding to me is the power that was even in the Selena movie. And I think that one of the most powerful scenes was when the dad was talking about you have to be more American than the Americans and more Mexican than the Mexicans, and they still won't accept you, basically. And it's interesting, in the United States, a place that's quote-unquote accepting and free, it all has a price. And some of those debts are never paid, no matter how much you pay, right? Pay into it. With all of that, you gotta think about it. Let's get this in the background. This is pretty cool. With all that stuff you think about, how can we truly move forward if we don't allow progress to happen? And also like the pain and discrimination and even issues those first generations have after. Because I'm pretty sure to Selena, she was just Selena, right? Yet she had to understand that she was brown and understand that she was seen as an other. And then more so being a woman in the 70s and 80s and stuff, right? And think about the discrimination she faced in the music industry, or even as a business owner, or all that stuff. Even within the Spanish community, because her Spanish isn't, the perfect Spanish. And I think that's something interesting that happens in the United States, for sure. I haven't really seen them like transcend everywhere else. I also haven't been everywhere else. But the concept of having to know the language, like the real language, but then also having to know English, and the sacrifices that a lot of parents make when they move here and then have kids here, because the kids aren't American by law because they're born here. The parents aren't. Like, I know I was born here, and what was unique in that was I'm American. All my cousins and aunts and uncles growing up would call me Americano. Why? Because I was born here, but also I didn't speak Spanish. Now, why didn't I? Personally, I just didn't pick it up. And I remember even as a kid, my mom wanted me to teach her English. So when I was going to school and preschool and all that stuff, I was learning English, and I would come home and do lessons with my mom. And like talk to her only in English, and then go to school and talk only in English. So Spanish wasn't a primary thing to speak, for me anyway. And it was difficult because I couldn't talk to my dad, because he only spoke Spanish. To this day, he only speaks Spanish. Now I speak Spanish, thankfully. I learned it by like high school. But it creates this division even within your own family. Because how many opportunities did I miss to like learn from my grandparents? Because again, they only spoke Spanish and only speak Spanish. So it became a barrier. So now we're having these youth grow up in the sense of isolation because they can't communicate to anyone, and even have difficulties communicating to their parents, and then having to translate things, right? Like, how many people have translated documents for their parents and translated rental agreements and translate, because all this stuff is not bilingual or trilingual or any of that stuff. So in the United States, we have a very unique circumstance in the context that we're a nation of immigrants. But even so, how much do we attack the perception of being one? because constantly being seen as another, constantly creating this sense of isolation, right? And I give props to all these communities too, because historically, you know, they constantly combat it. Why do we have a little Italy? Why do we have a little Mexico or Washington Heights? You know what I mean? Like these areas that become transfixed with immigrants because now they know they can go somewhere and still speak their language and feel connected to their homeland or community. And these have become, in a lot of ways, the most powerful and unique areas in the United States, right? Think about China, the Chinatowns and the Koreatowns. These are areas where immigrants are coming because they can start. And think of how the difficulty was for when people are going other places. And that goes back into like, well, with me and with what I do for a career. Like I lived in Wyoming, where a good, I think it was like 30% and growing of the population is like South American, like Mexican, Central American, stuff like that. Mostly Mexican as well, but the rest of it's white, you know, and the abysmal amount of it was African American. So, what does that create? That creates difficulties for the parents because they're coming here, moving, and get confounded with all the language and stuff, but also like with the economics of the different area, because there's the chances of someone else being there like them is smaller than normal, like bigger cities like New York and stuff, like New York City. But how can that have an effect? Because now the kids are going to grow up in these schools, in many cases as a second language, because if they were born in those places and then brought here, right, and migrated here, how much is truly transferring? Because then now they have to like learn not only the language but the culture, and then transcend the culture when they go back home. Because I know I've spoken to some students who speak only Spanish at home, speak only English outside. And then other students who only were born here and only know English, like myself, and the difficulties you have growing up trying to learn Spanish and trying to communicate. And you know, as a child, it's amazing too how much you just make it through, because like you make your own translators, right? Like I remember, I think I was a kid, and when I rode with my dad, I had to have my brother there. My brother knew Spanish. He was older than me, and I still remember, I think it was like one of the first times me and my dad were like alone together. And as I woke up in the morning, my brother like already went off with my cousins to do something or slept over at their house, and I woke up like, oh shit, hey. He's like, oh, you hungry? I'm like, what? And I'm like, hey, I'm hungry. He's like, what? So we're trying to communicate it to each other, and then he ended up making like picking up on things that I liked. So he knew I liked like the Nesquik strawberry milk, and we had cereals that like Pops. He mixed the two together, and if you ever had strawberry milk and Pops, it is the most disgusting thing ever. And I looked at him and looked at the milk and went, why is it pink? I'm like, okay. And I ate it, and I'm like, oh, this is gross, I don't want it. And he's like getting angry because like you have to eat, and my thought process is, this is gross, give me something else, like I'll make it myself. But you know, at the time I was so young, the bowls and everything else was too high, I couldn't reach it, so I couldn't ask him to pass me a bowl. And then I think I went to go like throw it out. He's like, no, what are you doing? You have to eat this. I'm like, no, it's gross. But he's yelling at me in Spanish and talking to me in Spanish, and I can't understand what he's saying. And then I'm crying at this point. I think I'm a little kid, and he doesn't understand why I'm crying. Thankfully, my brother shows up at that moment. He's like, oh, what's going on? And my dad's like so frustrated. Yo, this little kid, he doesn't want to eat. What the fuck's going on? And my brother just banks me another bowl of milk and cereal with like regular milk instead of putting the strawberry crap in. I started eating it, and my dad was so confused. But that's like a microcosm of events that can happen across the United States uniquely, right? You have generations growing up in this dichotomy of how can you truly be American, but also how can you truly be, like in my case, Dominican, Puerto Rican, right? Mostly Dominican, because I found out about the Puerto Rico stuff a couple years ago. And then we start getting into like the politics of it all, right? Like the whole "don't come" that we went over like last week. And think of that, right? Like people who look like you are being told not to come. And this is like more specific to like the Latino communities or Latinx communities, I should say. And the pain associated with that, the overall frustration, because by the time we get old enough to realize, no, I want to learn about my culture, no, I want to do this right, you're already probably like past college age or like already an adult, and that's 20 years from when you were a kid. In a lot of cases, not all cases. By then it's too late. The grandparents, that previous generation is already dying off, or you had to sacrifice so much and strain so many relationships that by the time you want to go back and learn, it's too late. Or not too late, it's just more difficult. And is that truly what America should be? Is that truly what we should be striving for? We can't keep preaching that diversity is great and then attack diversity at every corner. Because the unique things about differences is that it creates more of a holistic view, and it creates more opportunity for something different to happen, right? Like, think of Selena, right? She combined that American like pop style music, but also with the Tejano roots, and that in itself, even the concept of Tejano, because it's a combination of like Texas specifically and Chicano, like Mexican music and styles, and it creates this sound that won a Grammy, right? So with that combination, it becomes unique and it becomes other, and it becomes a new product. And how is the United States preaching so much capitalism, yet denying capitalistic moments to aspire because they're other, because they're different?
Today, she continues to fascinate the public. Fans, both new and still come to visit from across the globe.
Now, overall, being like a first generation, right? The battle of finding that balance, and I don't think anyone truly does, because there's so many things from our parents' generation that we admire, but also so many things that we completely disagree with, and even that comes from the times and the way they grew up. Like, I know a lot of parents, like in the Latinx community, that I've come across, or even that I've seen personally, are very like anti LGBTQ, right? And then our generation today is like, let people love who they love. It doesn't bother me. But then there's that conflict. There's also the conflict of, and it's interesting too, because you look like the Latinos for Trump or whatever. Why is that? Right? And you think about like the comparison too. Like, I remember I was trying to do more research on Trujillo, like for the Dominican Republic, when we had a dictator. And I looked at Trump. I'm like, ain't we see this before? Ain't we fight against this? And even like the dictators that like people want to say like the communist dictators, like in Cuba and stuff. Look at the way they're saying stuff, and then compare it to what he was saying, and then people are fighting against that, but for it here in weird ways. And again, like, they use the buzzwords like communism, like, I left communism because it was terrible. Okay, cool, but what were the actions they were doing? Because the actions they were doing was exactly what he was doing, right? It's a very interesting, unique thing that I feel like that first generation here sees, also falls prey to, because depending on how strict and stuff the parents are, but it becomes a unique perspective for sure. when you see things being fought at home, but also abroad, but also forgotten when it pops up here. And I think another unique thing that happens as well is, what's it called? How some changes are happening pretty great, right? Like you do have those families who are fully supportive of their youth and students and stuff, and want them involved in all the sports and all the opportunities that they never got as children, the things they had to sacrifice to get them here. Yet, at the same time, it creates kind of this conflict in a way, because there's that lack of understanding or that lack of comprehension, and things that are super important to the youth in that moment, the parent doesn't understand, because when they were their age, and that's like the comparison stuff that happens, like, oh, when I was your age I was already working, I was doing this, I was doing that, but wasn't the point of like fighting for the better life for this child so they didn't have to do X, Y, and Z? You know, that's just like a thought on that. Overall, it's interesting in the context that the uniqueness that first generation, like the children of that immigrant, right? When they're here, they have such a unique growing up experience that only other immigrant children understand. And it does translate like beyond the Latino community as well, like even like families who've come from like Africa, Asia, Europe, whatever, basically not the United States. Their parents moved here, immigrated here, and then they were born here. It's a very unique thing. You see it across the board. Like I even have friends whose family, or even they, were from Ghana, and now they were brought here so young that they basically grew up here, and vastly different comparisons when you think about like the other countries. But then the United States creates this unique experience where it empowers you but also disables you. It's like you have all this opportunity, yet it all comes at a price. And what that price can be, you don't see until much later, most times. And how do you truly honor and respect the previous generation in the midst of making your own way, right? How can you truly be American? How can you truly be Mexican, right? And I feel like that's a battle that's never ending. Because even when we have kids, what do we do? Do we teach them English? Do we teach them Spanish? Do we teach them both? How do we teach them both? How do you do it properly? How do you give them the opportunities you had, but also more, right? Because all that the concept of progress and what gets left behind and what gets left out. Because in some cases, when you were babysat or raised by your grandma so much, who speaks only Spanish and brings all that culture, by the time you have kids, that grandmother could be gone. So how do you provide that experience to your children and therefore, you know? But in all, I think the most beautiful thing is to try your best to learn as much as you can with all those cultures, and learn as much as you can. You know, still pave your own way and stuff, but like learn as much as you can before it's too late. And understand too, like you're not in this alone. Like you meet somebody who's a child of immigrants, they have stories too. But overall, what is the American dream? What is the American goal? Right? And I think that's something that's seen immediately in that concept of that first generation. And Selena was a great proof of it. Parents came here, sacrificed everything, and raised them best they could, took advantage of the opportunities, and combined so much culture and strength into her work that gave us what Selena was and who she was. became a business owner, became a Grammy-winning artist, like straight to the top, and staying humble. That's about it for this one. I know it's unique. And if you're like first generation here, share stories of it, you know? Share them in the comments or share them with friends and family, and talk about the unique experience that is growing up and kind of the things you had growing up that you want to share with the next generation, and what is the proper way, or is there even a proper way, or even the best recommendation. But it is overall a unique experience in the United States. Until next time.